Okay, rulers, settle down. Ruler School is brought to you by Odyssey Games, where you can go to get pre-orders of all the upcoming Force of Will sets, as well as releases of previous sets after they come out. TCGPrime.com, with over 100,000 Force of Will singles, as well as out-of-print boxes from the past, and TCG accessories, as well as FoulLibrary.com, a wonderful resource for deck lists, article discussions, and more. Check them out at FoulLibrary.com, as well as these amazing patrons. Special thanks to guest lecturer member Vite Ramen. Thank you for your support. Class is in session. Hey there, rulers, DMO73 here, bringing you a very fun feature match for the week. I have on the left Paul Clute playing Astema Beatrice kind of hand lock, and on the right we have a very fun version of Violet I like to call Taco Bell's Closed, because there is no Baha in the deck. As always, if you haven't already checked it out, pre-release for Game of Gods is this weekend, and pre-orders are still available at Odyssey Games, so go ahead and check that out because the new set's coming out, rotation's about to happen, and it's going to be great, so check that out. Yeah, Taco Bell's Closed. There's not a single Baha in the deck, no Baha blasting today. It is a kind of a... I would say it's more of a control variant. It's very heavy on Violet math, and it really uses atoms as like the main fuel and kind of win con of the deck. Like, we're trying to make use of trying to use the game with atoms, so we're things like Firestorm and Atomic Turbulence, not really for the like cancel effects or silence effects. We're just trying to find our way to get that damage and math our way to victory here without having to slam a Atomic Bahamut. So it gets a little bit insane with this list, but it is absolutely a lot of fun. Fun note, it's 49 cards. So just like Kyron Lucas's regular Baha Violet, we're also playing 49. The man's right, it is the best number of cards to play for Violet. So Paul's going to be going first here. We have that turn 1 using an Umir to play an Electo, and then being able to leave that open will. Turn 1, we hit the Ragnarok Stone, which we're okay with because thankfully we have Energize, and the Energize is all we need because we can play Heart to Heart Talk here, which lets us go and start using our Violet. Now we're going to be using Violet as we always do. It's to kind of sculpt and kind of get to where we need to with our hand. We do like to have a lot of atoms in the grave for Ragnarok, but we also like to have a lot of atoms in our hand for some cards you'll see later. So we don't necessarily just dump Everfrost or things like that. We're a lot more selective with what atoms we're going to be pitching based on the situation. So Gradius was able to pop the Electo, and then we did see a flash in of the Witch of the Black Forest. Sorry, Witch of the Fallen Kingdom. My Yu-Gi-Oh side showing. Using Umir, the last card in his hand, to get that Electo out as well. Swinging in for 4. Take it. Go down to 36. This is certainly a matter where he could use, he could just right now, especially in response to, like, if I use a Violet effect to then do an Everfrost after the Everfrost happens, just, like, Inferno me immediately. But ultimately choosing to just draw, in the end of turn, null there from the Beatrice, because I did use the Gradius to pop the Electo. I just don't want to deal with those Electos. Ripping my hands to shreds is certainly something that I can play through, but it's certainly not as fun. So just like that, you see, let's go ahead and use Violet to go get the graveyard removed. We say, no, before we can even get those Electos into getting any kind of advantage, let's go ahead and get those out of there. And then play Tiny Violet to bring that Void back. So this version of Violet is playing 4 Tiny Violets and 4 copies of the 3-drop Violet. Like I said, we're using atoms in a lot of different ways rather than just saying, hey, you know, we're gonna just dump everything for a Bahamut and then finish the game that way. So we see a Voice from the Void there to draw a card. There's a little bit of a sequencing thing that we could have done here that I think would have been helpful. So like that Voice from the Void's technically free. So like before draw his turn, he casts Voice from the Void for free, puts it on the chase, does Goddard still in response to that, go gets Inferno, plays the Inferno immediately to force me to discard all of that jazz, and then draws from Voice of the Void and draws for turn. So then he would be at 2 cards and I'd be at none. So a little bit of a sequencing thing there. The thing about the Astema Beatrice hand loop is it is kind of tricky to figure out. I figure out what the timing is there. Playing a Suya here to force me to banish the Tiny Violet and choosing to draw a card off of the Astema trigger there. Says we're going to go ahead and cast a Curse of Ragnarok. If I can't make you discard your whole hand, I'll at least make you RFG 1. This is a smart play here, especially, you know, based on what potential end game conditions there are here. We're going to go ahead and use a Dark Prominence in response with the Violet effect to hit that Witch of the Black Forest. Seeing a couple Spread of Atoms, Healing Robot, and then ultimately does choose to hit the Firestorm, which makes a lot of sense. That's a lot of potential damage there. The later the game goes, the worse that card gets for him to have to deal with. And then we see a pass. Gonna go ahead and before upkeep just hard cast the Void just to get that into the graveyard. And then move to recovery. Main reason to get rid of that is because of the Curse of Ragnarok in the graveyard. We don't want him to be able to do Suya next turn. So we'd rather just set that up. And again, we have the Tiny Violet, so we can bring the Void right back. This deck makes a lot of use of repeating the same atom over and over again, which is why it also runs the Robot, improved Burning Robot, which you'll see in a little bit. Moving to discard due to hand size. Or no, choosing to discard to Violet first. In response to the Gradius effects, he's going to go ahead and use Mermaid of the Despairing Voice to put the Suya back in his hand. And then at that point in time, we are going to have to discard due to hand size, I believe. I think we're still at 7 exactly. Or still at 8. Ultimately choosing to cast another Tiny Violet to make even more cards in my hand. There was a thought when I was building this list of maybe trying to actually play like a one-of in purse, just to be able to keep your hand size full. But because it has so much recycle in the form of the robots, in the form of the Tiny Violets, I decided against it. Most of the time we don't mind sending stuff to the graveyard anyway, because it just fuels the later game plan with things like Firestorm. So we'd rather just, you know, keep our hand sculpted to what we need and then bring it back when we need it bring the atoms back to hand as needed with all of our recursion. It's also one of the reasons why this version of the list is no longer playing Castle of Beatrice. We started with it, but then I realized that because of Tiny Violet and everything else like targeting, it makes more sense to just go ahead and get rid of it. We're not playing enough Resonators also for that really to matter. Flipped Astema here, trying to target the 2 Tiny Violets. We're going to take advantage of their effects here with an Everfrost to draw a card, and then a Dark Prominence to go ahead and get the Astema popped. So before my thing dies, Astema will be back on its front side, so it'll only get one of the 2 like advantages. It'll only get production of red or black or 1 card draw. We don't want him to get that much more value off of flipping and killing 2 of my things. Down comes a Pharesia, the Virtuous Vampire. This is a little bit of a problem here, as well as the focusing going out on my camera. Not being able to target that is a problem. A lot of the Atom stuff does target, so we got to figure out a way to get through that. Ultimately drawing it very nicely off of the Everfrost here. You see we do have that Atomic Turbulence. We're debating whether or not to play it during the upkeep, ultimately choosing to wait and see kind of what happens, recognizing I don't have to call Stone to Judgment My Ruler. And you do see we have the Demonic World Stone. This is because there are a couple, you know, cards that sometimes we want to pay red for that have the multi-attributes that work for that stone, or we don't care about it and we can just use it for Void, or we can just choose the black to pay for things like 3-drop like Violet. So it's the idea of it's not super hugely important to have the multicolor, but the flexibility of it is great. And I will say the Taco Bell's closed list is actually completely cluster, hence why the stone base is also a little bit weird. Paying 3 here, we have the Violet, the Flame of Providence Distortion. This is probably one of my favorite cards. It single-handedly made me enjoy playing Violet again. Off the bat, she was not my favorite to play. I know a lot of people like her, but she's not really my style. Violet, Flame of Providence Distortion makes me like playing Violet. This card is very, very fun, and you're about to get to see some of the silliness that comes from it. So I'm attempting to cast Violet here. Discarding 3 atoms when the enter effect resolves. So she gets, because she discarded 3 atoms, she gets to get 4+1/+1 counters. She's going to get swiftness for the turn, and she gets to draw 1 additional card for the number of cards discarded. So I discarded 3, I get to draw 4. Then because she's a Violet, all of these atoms then trigger because they were discarded by the ability of Violet. So I had to be careful here because I didn't want to be able to destroy stuff. So the two Aegises aren't going to pop anything because there's no additions to pop, but the Void's going to hit that last card in the graveyard. But as you can see there, I paid 3 will and I got like 5 effects off, and I put a 12-13 body on board that gets to swing in and do a lot of damage. So swinging in here for 12, he says, okay, that's fine. And then because he's tapped out, and he decided not to block, so I don't have any damage on the Violet, we're going to go ahead and do Atomic Turbulence, just discarding 2 atoms so that I can hit his face for 1,000 and burn the board for 1,000. So my Violet will survive because she's 1,300 defense and didn't take any damage from the block, and the Pharesia will die because she's only a 6/6. The idea there was if he goes to block, then we go ahead and do the Turbulence there anyway, but I'd rather do both, right? So he decided not to block. I'm going to push for that move anyway. It also floods my graveyard with atoms and keeps my hand a little bit more empty. As you see, even after discarding 2 cards and playing Turbulence, I'm still at 7 cards in my hand. This just gets us 1 step closer to being able to play a Firestorm if we draw into one. She doesn't live for very long, though. In comes Atsuya to kill her, which we are totally fine with. She got her job done. She dealt 22 damage, essentially provided the avenue for 22 damage. And then down comes Atsuya here. He does get to produce some extra will because something of mine died. He's going to go ahead and hard cast the invisible Terror, just to put another body on board that will keep coming back provided he has null. During his turn, we're going to go ahead and use Magical Loveliness, target the invisible the Suya to tap it down and deal 400 damage to him. Every little step closer that we want to get here. Like I said, we're not trying to burn you to death for 40 damage all at once, although I have done that with this list in terms of 10 atoms removed for a Firestorm. But we're chipping our way and kind of doing Violet math to get to where we need to go. Gonna go ahead and use that to play black to produce Void for a heart-to-heart, just to sculpt the hand a little bit better. So we do have another Atomic Turbulence here. Cast another one. Thinking about casting a third. Gonna go ahead and use Violet's effect just to kind of make sure I've seen all of my options here before I make the determination of what direction we're gonna go for the turn. Discarding an Everfrost and having seen that Eternal Wind, we're gonna go ahead and do a Judgment of Violet. I have so many cards in my hand that there's no way Violet's going to die here. There's nothing I can think of that would kill. But what we can do is we can set things up with a nice Eternal Wind here to recover the Ragstone and give her a barrier. So we started with giving her barrier right off the bat just to like minimize even more options of what he can do. And one thing to note is, again, with Violet is with the discard effect, you get to choose what the bonus is for it after, like, as it resolves. So it's very nice. Everfrost here to discard to give it swiftness, attempting to swing in for 8. He goes to block. We say, okay, cool, we're going to use Violet's effect. Going ahead and discard Dark Prominence to pop that, and then give her +2, take him down to 400. Now we could try to like discard our way down to find a lethal here. And I think in the terms of, you know, because he only has one card in hand, that probably would have been the smartest play for me to do. Ultimately, though, we choose to be a little bit more passive. You see we have Firestorm and Atomic Turbulence there. We let him draw for turn, just trying to see kind of what options he might have. It's kind of one of those, you get a little tunnel visioned and like want to just be super careful, especially since I hadn't played against this list before. I wasn't sure what might have been there to be able to potentially stop the damage. I'd rather just take the 10 and find my way to lethal, especially since, you know, having a single magical loveliness or, you know, the Atomic Turbulence in my hand, but I don't have to discard any atoms for, by the way. It deals 500 damage just by itself, if you discard 0 atoms. Paul saying, yeah, I don't think I have anything there, at which point I show the Atomic Turbulence, not having to discard anything, just pop him and take him down to 0. And then we move into game 2. Like I said, this version of Violet is using Violet. Like, it's using flipped Violet, frontside Violet, tiny Violet, Turbulence Violet, or Providence Distortion Violet. Like, we're using atoms every single possible way they've, in terms of triggering them, every single possible way they've been designed to be able to be triggered, rather than just like pay the dump every atom to the grave, flip over, you know, kill you game, which again is a lot more fun. It makes the game a lot more like a puzzle, and so it's pretty enjoyable. So let's see if Paul can get a little bit more gas behind the engine there, before things get too out of hand. Setting that first turn 6 Sage Stone, we're going to see that Heart to Heart come down, automatically starting things up. Draw Everfrost, and then passing the turn. First turn 6 Sage Stone. Wall of Terror comes down. So there's the first stop, right, in terms of getting himself down to null. As soon as he finds an Electo or the draw engine, he's at a good spot to be able to keep things flowing. Especially since Atomic Turbulence doesn't kill Wall of Terror if you're at 0, which feels really, really nice. Attempting to use Gradius during his turn to pop the Wall of Terror, knowing that he's going to discard a card. So I'm kind of helping him, but it's more of like, if I can get him down to null when I want him to be there, then I have better control over the situation rather than surprising me at null. And the more I can kind of force him to keep having to spend resources on protection, the more I can keep him off resources when it's him trying to push advantage. So we use the Tiny Violet to get that Gradius and that Everfrost back, and we're immediately just going to use it with Tiny Violet to say, hey, discard another card, please. At which point in time, the Witch of the Fallen Kingdom comes down. Discard due to hand size. We go ahead and pitch a Magical Loveliness. We don't want to have to tap down our own Tiny Violet, so we're just going to say, okay, we'll find that 4 damage burn later. See, he does have the Inferno. Search for a second one, potentially. Ultimately chooses to ship the turn. Violet effects, discarding an Everfrost. Choosing not to use Tiny Violet, we're just going to go to draw. The reason why we didn't use Tiny Violet here is because there's a little bit of a, would he maybe have something in response to Tiny Violet or after she goes off that I'm then like completely unprotected, because I don't have the Violet effect either. So that's why we chose to just let it go through there. Now that the wall doesn't have barrier, we can go ahead and at least target it with Magical Loveliness and get that 4 burn in and not have to tap down our Tiny Violet. Forces him to discard a card. Down goes the Heart to Heart, which we're totally fine with that card being gone. Any kind of cantrips that Paul has in the deck, we would love to have not be there. Choosing to try to discard down to hand size, we got to pick kind of what we want to get rid of. Offering to move to cleanups. Paul says, yep, that's fine. We're not going to do anything. We're going to go into my turn. I think this is during the end phase of my turn. We're seeing a discard to give it barrier again. A Goddard of Beatrice. Just to be able to have the Goddard for Inferno to search for the deck for later. So accepting that he's not going to get to draw any cards, but choosing to cast the Inferno to do all 3 modes. So doing this during my turn. So he's currently all 3 modes. He's going to set us both to 0 here. At which point in time, like I said, we get to do some fun, silly stuff with flames. And you see we have a Violet, we have a Turbulence, and we have a Firestorm in hand. So we kind of just try to find some cool avenues to play here, but we're going to respond to the Violet Flame of Providence Distortion with Violet Flame of Providence Distortion, who's then get to cycle through a lot of our deck all in one turn. So he has nothing in response to the enter effect, choosing to discard 5 cards, which will draw us 6 cards. And then get us an extra card off of Everfrost. We are going to choose to target our Tiny Violet with Dark Prominence, because we have to banish down to 1 Resonator anyway, and we want to keep Violet Flame of Providence. Eternal Wind's going to recover us a stone, and then we're going to use Tachyon to clone his Inferno. We say, look, hey man, I have more card advantage than you in every single way. Please discard down to match my card advantage. Just as a fun, silly thing. That's one of the other things is this deck does play 4 Tachyons. It's an absolute blast. Now we're kind of saying like, okay, we've got this moment. We've got this 1 floating will. I've got this Firestorm in my hand. I've got all kinds of stuff here. What do we want to do? I do actually think this might be before draw on his turn. We'll see, and we'll see based on what happens to this Wall of Terror. Because right now this Wall of Terror is a 4/12. If he draws a card and the Wall of Terror dies, then this is happening before draw on his turn. Which is the reason why we might go for an Atomic Turbulence here, because it'll keep our Violet alive, but it'll kill his wall, because his wall will have 1,000 damage. He'll draw a card, and then his wall will no longer have the null bonus, so he will immediately die due to rules process. Which might be one of the reasons why we know we're going to discard this entire hand anyway. Let's go for a Turbulence. So we are going to go ahead and go for the Turbulence play, discarding 3 atoms. They're all going to get discarded due to the effect of Inferno anyway. And this does keep our life a little bit higher. So discarding 3 to say, hey, look, you're going to get to draw a card, but you can't cast any spells this turn. My Violet's going to survive. Yours isn't. Your wall isn't going to survive. And then I'll match you at 2,600 life. But you're staring down at 1213. Says the Turbulence is fine, nothing goes wrong there. Still waiting on the Inferno to resolve, and with that, it does. So I lose my entire hand. And we are both at 2,600 life. Draws for turn. Yep, okay, so it was a draw before his turn. So playing the Turbulence there makes a lot of sense, because then we're still 1 card for 1 card. which feels really nice. Don't get me wrong, we're probably going to see a flip of this Astema to immediately kill my my Providence, and then gets to draw him 2 cards, which feels pretty great for him, especially since I can't do anything. Like, he can't cast any spells, but he also can't like do anything negative. Like, having the card advantage wouldn't hurt. So yeah, he's gonna use Astema, kill the Violet, choosing to draw 2 cards off the flip. Puts him into a pretty good shape there. He's got a 3-drop Mermaid of Despairing Voice, an Umir, and a Beatrice's Imagination. Pretty good cards here. We're going to go ahead and use Violet's effect during his turn, and we hit the Everfrost, which is great. So we get to draw a card, and then we're going to go ahead and draw a card for turn. So still get to be having some card advantage. And then here's the crazy part about this deck. This is an improved Burning Robot. We just discarded a bunch of atoms, and this is what I'm talking about. I can target any number of different atoms and put them back into my hand to immediately refill it. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. I catch in a second that I grab 2 Everfrosts and I discard it. So 9 cards to hand. Just like immediately refilling my hand back up to 9 atoms because I had so many different atoms in the graveyard, which is what this deck loves to do. Seeing if he has any response to me targeting those. He does not. He doesn't have anything to deal with my graveyard, so all of those cards going back in my hand. I started this turn with 0 cards, and now I am back to 10 cards in hand. I'm gonna go ahead and swing. Declare combat and swing. He says that's fine. This is one of the moments where this is the moment where I realized I grabbed 2 Everfrosts, so I'm going to discard one of them, recognizing that I couldn't have possibly revealed that many. Say, oh wait, yeah, 2 Everfrosts, my apologies. Go to the reveal trigger Burning Robot, and I get to reveal 9 unique atoms, so he will have 18 +1/+1 counters on him, swinging in for 2100 damage. Enough to take him down to just a Turbulence. That being said, you know for a fact that Astema is going to try to kill it. So we're not super afraid there of the trade. Not even going to bother with the counters because I know where to meet. Somehow it's going to get removed. It's just a matter of what the sequencing is that gets it removed. I do have 2 floating red because of those 2 6 Sage Stones. Or no, I don't have any floating red. I played the Burning Robot. Using Violet's effect. Response to block, we're going to discard Eternal Winds, recover one of those 6 Sage Stones, which we don't care if it just produces Void, because we have 2 red sources. And to that, we can cast another Violet Flames of Providence Distortion. So all those atoms I just brought back into my hand, we're going to cast them again. Violet effects, and she's going to get Swiftness this turn, which is going to also put in a bunch of damage. In response to the Violet effect, he's going to say, look, I don't want to take 2100 damage, so before you actually can do any other untap shenanigans or silly things like that, we're going to go ahead and put your Burning Robot back in your hand. So it negates that damage, which is still a pretty good choice. So a Brave Force, a Void, a Dark Prominence, an Everfrost, a Magical Loveliness, and a Gradius, all getting discarded, leaving 4 cards in my hand. So I discard 6, and then I get all 3 modes for her. So I draw 7. And Everfrost is going to get to draw me an 8th. She gets the 4 counters. She has Swiftness now, so she's a 12-13 with Swiftness, and now we build a chase. So Gradius is going to target, resolving last. Everfrost is going to draw me a card. Dark Prominence is going to target. Magical Loveliness is going to target and burn. Void's going to remove his graveyard, which at this point is just a single copy of Beatrice, Castle of Beatrice. And then Brave Force is going to pump up the Violet, so should have 1800 attack swinging in. So I just discarded 6 cards, drew 8 cards, and put 6 abilities on the chase. Brave Force pumps her up. Void's going to remove the Castle of Beatrice in his graveyard. Magical Loveliness to burn him for 4, take him down to 22. Dark Prominence to pop Astema. He goes, wait a minute, I get her trigger effect. I go, wait, no, you bounced. You didn't do that. That's the important thing about Astema, is she wants to kill things, not bounce them. Everfrost draws us an extra card. Gradius has nothing left to target, so it'll fizzle. And then we can swing in for a grand total of 18 damage with this Swiftness Violet. going down to 400. So once again, putting him in right that little narrow window, and once again, flooding our hand, having to discard the hand size. I think another Eternal Wind would have been really great here, because then, like, before draw on his turn, we could just, you know, Eternal Wind, cast the cast the Atomic Turbulence, win the game. But ultimately, we're just gonna have to accept what he's doing. The reason I like Flame Violet so much is just because of these, like, almost like chemical reactions that she gets to set up by discarding so many atoms at once. It really does feel like we're doing chemistry. Not the best hand here. You see a couple Umirs, which we're going to go ahead and get out of his hand to produce a couple floating blue will. And the thing that sucks here for Paul is that he doesn't want to put that violet back in my hand because it's just going to give me more draw power. Like, the enter effects are crazy here from these violets, Tiny Violet, and like any of my cards, just in terms of the amount of card value I generate just putting them back in my hand. So Beatrice Imagination comes down here, and in response, we're going to go ahead and use Violet's effect to cast Tachyon to clone it. Now, I don't... We played it as if I didn't get to produce the blue and the black will, because I'm pretty sure that's accurate, because my hand isn't null. If I'm wrong there and I could have produced blue-black, then the situation's very different, and it's not necessarily so silly. But, as it were, I wasn't terribly concerned about what was going to be coming my way in terms of finding lethal damage right now. So it's just like, I'll just throw a Tachyon out here and clone a spell. Feels good. Down comes the Quick Cast Inferno off of the Astema Gods art, so it's going to set us both back down to 0. I'm perfectly prepared to discard my entire hand. Uses the floating from Beatrice's Imagination to cast it. Set us both down to 0 life, kind of re-even the board states here. That huge hand of mine once again gone to the Shadow Realm. And then we see a cast of Wall of Terror. And then I believe he starts to go to pass, and then I remind him of the Floating Will and the fact that Umir can be cast from the grave, or RFG, so I was like, hey, put another body on board. So rather than let the will go to waste when your hand's empty, at least put another body out. To be able to have 2 threats, potentially, if I can't draw into anything. Because the other thing is, with only 1 card, unless I top deck an Everfrost, Violet's not going to be able to find her way to lethal. Sure, I do have lots of different ways to do 400 damage, but like, if I don't draw them, it doesn't help me. I have thinned the deck significantly, though, with how many atoms I've gone through. So we do see the Umir come down, puts that other body on the field, and then I pass. Activating Violet effects. We had a Burning Robot, but what we top decked into was a Tiny Violet. Tiny Violet gonna be the ceiling of the deal, because Tiny Violet can get us back a Tachyon and an Everfrost and a Magical Loveliness, which can burn us that last 4 damage here, and then all I have to do is just Judgment Violet and close out the game that way. So that I have a way to be able to discard the Magical Loveliness. So flip over the Violet, pitch the Magical Loveliness, burn out that last 4 damage, and that is going to be the game. So there you guys have it. There is Taco Bell's Closed Violet versus Astema Beatrice Hand Loop. You can see some of the silliness that both decks can really put on the board in terms of controlling your opponent's hand, but also just drawing a million cards and creating really cool chain reactions. Hope you guys liked it. We will have deck profiles for both of these lists up later this week. Hopefully this weekend, if not early next week, due to pre-release coming up this weekend. Get those pre-orders in if you haven't, and check us out this weekend for our live pre-release coverage. And until next time, this is DMO73 saying, class dismissed.